And in case you don't know, color correction is this thing, really cool thing that like assigns a filter. And like it looks like this, and it's really cool. All right, so no matter who you are, actually wait, no, it matters who you are, right? If you are someone who's installed Roblox Studio ever, like I'm sure, you know, you played Roblox and you're like, okay, you know, looks interesting. Maybe I want to make some game, right? Because for me, I had that when I was around like 11 or 12 or like around that age. You know, I played a bunch of Roblox games and I saw like, oh wow, you could make your own game and you could maybe even, you know, make money off of it. Even though back then I didn't really think about that. I just wanted to make a cool little game to, you know, show other people. And I'll be honest, you know, back then as a kid, I tried multiple times. I struggled a lot because like the idea of scripting never really came into my head. Like I kind of tried to avoid scripting for as long as possible. And instead, you know, I would use things like, you know, I'd find like assets in the toolbox, or I would, you know, look up items in here and kind of try to do something with them. My point being that like I never quite understood how Studio itself worked. But then, you know, like around 2 years ago, when I was like 15, 16, I realized that, hey, I need to learn how to script first in order to even think about making any sort of game. And then once I learned that, once I started actually getting more into Studio, I started seeing, you know, everything that this thing actually has to offer. I got infinitely better at not just coding in general, but, you know, actual game development with it too. Because obviously the more stuff you have at your disposal, the more you can do with it. And the other thing that this obviously means is that I've spent quite a lot of time with this default base plate. Now, in case you don't know, this is the default Roblox template, right? So basically almost any game that you're playing right now, it's basically guaranteed that this is how it started, right? Some guy decided to make, you know, this project, invited some other people, or maybe did it solo and, you know, like added, you know, features, added mechanics, and then eventually transformed this, you know, pretty big block into something that's actually playable and perhaps into something that you've poured hours and hours into, right? Couldn't be me. I don't know why people grind in Roblox games. Like I never understood that, but you know, you do you. And when I see template, I say that because it's an actual template, right? So, you know, it kind of has different categories for them, but effectively any single Roblox game starts out in one of these, right? You can't really make a project that's just empty. It has to be either the base plate, the classic base plate, flat terrain, you know, whatever these ones are with this anime girl avatar, I don't know. Or, you know, we have these very old and outdated themes, and practically all of these templates have an actual use, right? I mean, the base plate, again, it's just the classic. It's just, you know, whenever you want to make your own custom game and you know what to do. Classic is for people who just miss this ugly looking thing. I don't know why they do. Flat terrain, I'll be honest, I'm not too sure why this even exists. I guess if you want to start out your game with just terrain and not like a part, which if you don't know the differences between the two, I mean, they're pretty big, like a part and terrain are different things, but it's very easy to switch between the two, so I'm not too sure why they're separate. But that's just my little nitpick, right? Everything else kind of serves a purpose, right? A platformer, laser tag, UGC home store, I don't even know, FPS system, and, you know, a bunch of stuff here. You know, with the anime girl, all of these do look kind of out of place, but the goal is pretty clear, right? They have certain vibes and themes to them, and they also have scripts inside of them, especially these newer ones, that teach you how something works. Like, for example, I'm not going to do this right now, but if you're curious, you can go in, get Studio or Open Studio, click on FPS system, because I'm sure even some of you advanced scripters have never even tried these before, and you can just kind of check out how it works, right? You could go and look at the script and be like, oh, okay, interesting. So this is how Roblox wants me to make a gun system, or like a kill system, or this is how Roblox has their menus set up, or like something like that. This is the effective purpose of templates, right? To let you get in, do something, and transform that into your own actual experience, or in some cases like these ones, to already learn from like a pre-built game. So clearly we now understand that this default template, right, this base plate, is meant for people who want to make their own game, right? It's meant for people who say, look, I know how to script FPS systems, I know how to make a UGC home store, again, whatever that is. They're basically saying, okay, throw me in, you know, give me all the tools immediately, you know, like don't clutter up the project with just, you know, random nonsense, and, you know, just let me do my thing. And I'll be honest, this template does this pretty well. Like, I know that this video is meant to highlight flaws in, you know, the template, and obviously, you know, I'll get to that in a bit, but I do just want to say, because I'm sure some people will see the title and be like, oh, you're wrong, this is amazing, right? I'm not saying it's not amazing, right? I wouldn't be with Roblox this long if I genuinely thought that this was a terrible, terrible template. It's really not. It's great. I really like it. I like how the spawn location is very simple. I like how the base plate is a good size, you know, it kind of gives you a lot of playing room, and I especially like the fact that it actually has these like squares, and, you know, they look really nice. And I say I like them because it represents the grid, right? So look at that. Like you can actually see how big something is without having to like just rely on, I don't know, intuition or whatever. So, you know, that's my little disclaimer, right? This is a good template. I'm not saying it's bad at all, but there are definitely some flaws, which the more I use Studio, the more I notice. It's like one of those things, you know, it's like, it doesn't matter really for the first time. Like a lot of people who haven't used Studio for too long probably never really have noticed these issues, right? Or maybe they have, but maybe they just kind of chalk it up to the fact that they're new and they're like, okay, maybe like I just don't know how to do this properly, right? A lot of people don't quite see issues in the thing that they're using because they see themselves as inexperienced. And again, because of that, they kind of blame everything on them, if that makes sense. But this is a, you know, death by 1,000 cuts situation, or like one cut doesn't really hurt, 1,000 cuts basically kills you, right? And this, I think this analogy is pretty appropriate for this video. Now, initially, I was gonna make this into like a list of flaws. Like I was gonna, you know, have like a little script on my phone and just be like, okay, guys, flaw number 1, right? And I kind of had some things written down, but while writing them, I kind of realized that this would just be kind of boring if I just go through a list and I'm like, oh, this thing is bad, or this thing is bad. And also, it's a problem because then it's kind of hard for me to talk genuinely. Like, I feel like when you go through a script, even when it's done with talking points, it's just difficult to come off and actually give, like, real advice. This is very off topic, right? But have you ever watched those, like, money videos? Or maybe not even watch, but maybe, like, seen little clips of them? And it's, like, some guy sitting there being like, okay, bro, you know, I didn't go to college, and instead I made 10K a month with this dropshipping method. Just comment dropship, and I'll email you my free package, or like something like that. It's like, nobody talks like that, right? Imagine if some guy came up to you in real life, and then like, you know, you're chilling there with your friend, and you're like, oh, hey man, what's up? And then he sits down next to you, looks you dead in the eye, right? Just imagine this. And he says, I made 10K a month this year with my dropshipping method. Do you want to learn how I did? And you're like, what are you saying, bro? Like, nobody talks like that, right? It's obviously scripted. So again, I know that was kind of off topic, but it ties into this pretty well that I didn't want this video to be too scripted. And, you know, because of this, there might be some things that I somewhat miss, or there might be some things which I say kind of in the moment, right? Like maybe I say something which upon further inspection isn't really that big of a deal, but maybe just right now it's something that kind of irks me and I don't really like it. So this will be a very opinionated video, you know, as someone who's been using this for quite some time. But I am sure that a lot of people who've been using this for a while as well will agree with me on at least a couple of these points. Now, I have a general rule of things that I don't like in Roblox Studio, and I will use this as a very good example, which is the starter GUI. So for those who don't know, GUI is user interface. It's like, you know, things like buttons, text, basically like 2D things, right? Something 2D, something clickable, like a menu, whatever. And let's say I want to make a button, right? I have to put them inside of starter GUI. So I can type in button, you know, text button, but it's not showing up, right? So I have a button in here, but I don't see it. I don't know where it is. And I remember initially, again, I was kind of stupid back then, right? But like initially I would try to figure things out myself, right? Like, and the thing is, I would watch tutorials at that time, but I'd be watching like very beginner tutorials, which didn't really cover user interface. And so, you know, like while going through tutorials, I also like to try and explore things on my own. I would add a button and I'd be like, oh, what's wrong? Why isn't it working? And immediately what came to my mind was like, oh, maybe I have to like toggle some property, right? Or maybe the button did spawn in, but maybe it's like very, very tiny. Like maybe the size is like 0, 0, or maybe it's not tiny, but maybe it's like outside of bounds and I have to like bring it into the screen, or like something like, or perhaps I have to put something in the button, you know, like it was just these sorts of things which made me really wonder and overthink about things. And here's the thing, that's never good, because then it makes you think that something that you're using is way more complicated than it actually is. I get so many comments in Discord, and I get some emails as well. I don't know why people email me for this stuff when, you know, I have a Discord, but it's like they come to me with like the most basic questions, and then they're like, oh, hey, you know, I think that this is how it works, and then they're correct in their assumption, but then they're like, oh, but you know, I'm pretty sure Roblox Studio works in this way, and, you know, I want to ensure that my game doesn't, you know, break because of this and blah, blah, blah. So basically, they took a very simple thing, and I can't think of any good examples right now, which kind of sucks, but you see what I mean, right? You can take a very simple thing, But then if you feel like it's very complicated, if you feel like there's many layers involved in the process, it's just gonna feel difficult. Right now, whenever you think of making a game, you've just attached all of these extra layers, all of this extra work that you have to do for no real reason. And obviously I'm not saying that everything is easy. Of course, there are some things that do have multiple layers, but like for something like the user interface, I skipped it, right? I stopped doing it because I'm like, okay, I'll watch a tutorial later, I'll figure it out. But the thing is, I did leave somewhat annoyed because I've tried different game engines in the past, and it's a very common experience for me that it's very rare for me to figure something out by my own, and I just have to rely on tutorials, right? And it's so stupid. I try to do something by myself, and it doesn't work, and I'm like, this should work. And then I try to figure out a way for this to work, and it doesn't work. But then I checked out the tutorial, and then they were like, oh yeah, this is how you do it, right? And half the time, it's either some like really dumb method, which is always annoying, or it's something which is like, when they tell me it, it's like, yeah, obviously, like this seems like common sense now, but for some reason I couldn't figure it out before, right? And again, both are equally annoying. And with the user interface, right, you know what you have to do? Instead of having a text button, you first need to add a screen GUI, like so, and inside of that screen GUI, that's where you add a text button, just like that. And I remember seeing that in the tutorial, and I was really like, I'm like, why is this even a thing, Now, obviously, right now, I understand that this is necessary, right? In case you don't know, a screen GUI is meant to be like an ultimate container for user interfaces. It's like a folder, right? You have a folder, and then you can have like a bunch of different folders that have a bunch of random user interface items. And then there's also the fact that like user interface could also be in different variations. Like, for example, instead of just a screen GUI, you can have an ad GUI where you can, make ads. You have a billboard GUI, which kind of summons, here, let me show you. If I just copy the text button and paste it over here, a billboard GUI, I don't really know if you can see that. I guess actually, wait, if I just make the size of this thing a bit bigger. And so yeah, if I just make the size a bit bigger, this is effectively what like a billboard GUI is, right? I just made it, again, incredibly huge, but it's effectively a way for a user interface to like hover above some sort of parts, right? And it's still clickable. Like if I go and play this right now, I'll still be able to, click this button that's like hovering up there. And then, yeah, as you can see, it becomes like an actual like kind of 3D thing. It's not really 3D like fully because it's still a 2D element, but like, it moves around the world, and it's also affected by like lighting. So like the sun, like it's bright right now, but if I like turn it around the sun, look at that. It like becomes like darker. That's pretty cool. So a screen GUI has its uses. Obviously, I'm not denying that, right? It's a very important item. However, here is my problem. Have you ever played a game without user interface? Like, have you ever played a game that had no button, that had no piece of text that shows up somewhere? And actually, let me reiterate that question. Have you ever played a popular game without user interface? Never. You've never played a popular game without user interface. So my problem, which again, this nitpick is an example of, is that this default template doesn't already have a screen GUI inside of starter GUI. Like legitimately, I sat down and I really pondered for a solid like maybe 30 seconds, right? And I just asked myself, like, why wouldn't Roblox have a screen GUI? Like if I make this into a video and I publish it, would there be some guy in the comments saying, oh no, you're wrong, Roblox doesn't do this because blah, 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 I'm a nerd, blah, blah, blah. I genuinely can't think of a single reason. Again, if you want to have user interface within your game, you have to use a screen GUI. Like I said, yes, we have like a billboard GUI, and then we have a surface GUI, which is basically a thing that like shows itself on parts. Like I could have like a button be on like the face of this part. But again, user interface is just the thing on your screen. It's like a button for the shop, right? And that requires a screen GUI. There's no working around. You just have to have this thing. And so whenever I want to begin making a user interface, I have to click here and I have to make a new screen GUI. I have to then, rename it to something like my amazing GUI, I don't know. And then from there, I could start adding buttons and all of that. And again, like I said in the beginning, this is a very nitpicky thing because it's just an extra click. Like there really isn't anything hard here, right? Like, okay, frame, text label, text button, blah, 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 blah. But before someone says that, like, oh yeah, it's a little thing, so obviously that's why they won't add it, right? I mean, like the average person doesn't really probably care too much about this, so, obviously why would Roblox care? And it's like I said before, I would have a way easier time learning user interface if this thing was already present in here by default. Like I try add a button and it wouldn't work, and I'm like, okay, well, what if I place it in here? Just testing stuff out. and now it works. Awesome. So there we go. I just learned something new. And yes, I know that when you click on a starter GUI, like this thing pops up where you can click on this thing. Maybe I'm blind. I don't know. I've never really looked at this screen at all because my first encounter with items is that you can add them over here. So I only focused on what was here. I never really looked at this side of the screen. Maybe I'm just an exception. Maybe everyone else does that, and this renders my points useless. But I do think that a lot of new players don't really focus on this area. I think a lot of them just look to what's here. And when something doesn't work, it just, I don't know, I think sours the experience. And if Roblox actually were to add, this in by default, they probably would have to rework the system a little bit to where, like, when you click on starter GUI, it actually detects that there's already a screen GUI, and then you can already click on one of these, right? Because, like, to be fair, it would be a lot quicker to just do like this and this, right? Than to, open up the starter GUI, then click on screen GUI, and then click on this thing, and then look up your item. So, I do think that, once you click on a starter GUI with something inside of it, you should get access to all of these immediately. And another thing as well is that I feel like this brings in a lot more attention to this part of the screen. Because if I delete this right now, like, all of these are kind of grayed out, right? There's just one little thing. But then here it's like you can see, okay, frame, text label, now your eyes kind of divert here. And now you see all of the options. And now you can actually add a button instead of having to click here. And then you're like, okay, now I can do them. And it's kind of confusing this way. Now, I said before that this ties into a bigger issue that I have with Roblox Studio. And again, when I say bigger issue, it's not a big issue, it's just a bigger issue. So, hopefully that somewhat makes sense. But the issue is that it feels like Roblox tries to make everything as blank as possible. Even things that are practically used every single time anyone makes a game. So again, the user interface is a great example of this. I guess Roblox just wanted this to be empty to give you the choice to add user interface. But again, every single person does, right? Why not already have this in here? And again, thinking of beginner developers, why not make it more obvious as to the fact that you need a screen GUI, right? I'm okay with, there not being like a billboard GUI inside of the base plate, for example, because, most games don't really use a billboard GUI. It's a cool thing, right? And I like games that use it, but it's not like a massive requirement as much as standard user interface is. And so this leads me into my main complaint about Studio, which is that it lacks a lot of items. Specifically, it lacks a lot of explanations of items. So for example, right, and this one might be a bit more unpopular, and I actually would agree with that myself, but I'll just use this as a quick example, right? Everybody uses remote events, right? And in case you're a beginner developer, this is effectively a way for people, like players, to communicate with the game. For example, if let's say the player presses a button on their screen, only the player knows that. The game doesn't actually know that the player pressed the button from their side of the game. So what has to happen is the player has to tell the game, hey, listen, I pressed the button, I'll send you a message, right? And then once you receive that message, you get the fact that it was me who pressed the button. Maybe you get some other pieces of information that I've sent over. And then you can, use that data however you want and actually make a change that affects everyone else in the server. Like if you want to kill a player, you'll have to send a message to the server because on the client, you can't kill anyone besides yourself. That was actually kind of a confusing explanation, I'll be honest, but the way that this is done is simply by using a remote event. So I'll just give you a very basic example, right? If let's say we get the user input service and we say, okay, whenever input begins, and we'll get the input, and then if input dot user input type is equal to enum user input type mouse button 1. So if the player presses mouse button 1, then let's say we want to change the color of this spawn location to be red. Problem here though is that if I say, okay, color is equal to color3.new, and then I set it to be red like so, and then if I go and start playing the game and I click my mouse, it's red here, right? So amazing. But I'm on the client right now. If I switch to this server, which is like what everybody else will see, it's still white. So doing things on a local script or doing things locally only changes them for you. Now, there are some things that by default you do have control over. Like for example, if I were to change the speed of my character to be like really high on a local script, the game actually would send that message to the server, and then the server would make my speed really fast. So there are some things that you are able to do locally that also transfer to the real game. But like 99% of the time, you're not, right? And so if I wanted this color change to be visible by every single player, then instead of putting this down here, I would have to get the remote event. So I'd have to say game, replicated storage, remote event. I would have to fire to the server like so. And then I would need to have a server script over here. And then I'd have to say again, replicated storage, remote event on server event. So we'll catch that event, connect it to a function, and then we can put the player over here who actually, fired the event. We can just print, I guess, the player.name over here. And here we can actually change the color of the spawn location. So right now, if I check, it's white in the server, white on the client. If I click, it turns red, prints my name. And if I go to the game over here, now it's actually red, right? So everybody else will actually see it as though it's red because it actually is. So you can hopefully see how important this is, right? How massive of an item this remote event is. And the fact that it just isn't here by default. And again, this isn't a big deal. I don't really care. If I press the plus button over here, it literally shows up as like the second option. So like, Roblox understands how important of an item this is. But, having these immensely popular items already built in does two things. Number one, saves a tiny bit of time. Again, like, we're saving like a solid maybe second here, which obviously isn't a lot, right? But that's always good. You always want to help people save time. Worst case scenario, if they really hate this, they can just quickly delete it and that's it, right? But the average person will use a remote event, right? In fact, anyone who doesn't use a remote event probably makes up like, honestly, like a very, very close to 0% of all developers. Practically every single developer uses a remote event. So that's the first thing. But the second thing as well is that it shows new players what is actually important. And also it shows new players what each of these things is supposed to be. For example, imagine if the workspace just had nothing in it, right? That would be kind of weird. Like you'd be like, okay, like for example, imagine if the workspace had nothing inside of it. Of course, you could watch a tutorial and then someone could tell you, oh yeah, if you want to add 3D items, they have to be in the workspace. And okay, like at that point, yeah, you would know. But the fact that they're already here to begin with, it teaches you things, Like it shows you that, okay, the camera is over here, so you can change the camera. It shows you that terrain is here, so this is how you manipulate terrain. It shows you that the spawn location and the base plate are here, and these are the things that you can actually see. So logically, you think if I want to add a part, I'd probably have to put it inside of the workspace. Or then you have something like lighting, right? All of these could just be deleted, right? But instead they are here and they actually have an effect on the game. Like as you saw, when I delete them, the color does kind of change, right? So, while these do actually affect the project, they're mainly here, in my opinion, to actually show people kind of what they do, right? Yeah, atmosphere, bloom, depth of field. Like I'm telling you right now, a lot less people would really care about what like all of these things do if they weren't already here. The interesting ones that a lot of people like are blurring and color correction, right? And in case you don't know, color correction is this thing, really cool thing that like assigns a filter and like it looks like this and it's really cool. And I think there's a reason why these two weren't present. I'm not saying that they have to be enabled or whatever, but I think it's just that all of these are kind of boring. Right? Like, I don't think the average player will really care about adding atmosphere to their game. Like, what does that even fully really mean? Instead, the fact that they are actually here and not just hidden away in a menu means that people now kind of understand like, oh, hey, these are important, and they start playing around with them. And then, they come to realize that, oh, these are actually, quite important, and these actually do a lot of interesting things. And I'm unsure if this was the intention of people who were making a Roblox Studio, but I think this is definitely an effect of having these items in here. And I think you could do this for all of the other ones as well. Like, okay, like players is pretty self-explanatory, and you can't really, add a player here before they're actually playing the game. But again, something like replicated storage, you could have a remote event in here to let people know like, hey, this is an important thing. Maybe you'd want to, kind of see what it does, look it up, play around with it. And then, here inside of like server script service, you could like just add a script, just a regular script by default that doesn't really do anything. Maybe we could go even further. Maybe we can even add a module script inside of the script. So maybe again, by default, you could have a script which has a module script, which again does two things, right? It lets the average scripter save some time, especially I feel like with module scripts, because I feel like a lot of people don't really use them. But again, it also lets new players know, hey, this is important, look it up, research it, play around with it. Because again, if this wasn't here, you just don't fully understand like what you're supposed to add. Yeah, again, it's obvious now, but as a new player, it's somewhat difficult to know what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And so again, like screen GUI inside of starter GUI. For both of these, you know, starter character script and starter player scripts, you could also just have a script built in by default, right? Again, just a local script. And then for characters, you could have maybe a local script or a server script, or maybe both as well. And then, like, again, yeah, like even if I go down, like text chat service, and I'll be honest, I've never really used this thing. But again, you know, chat window configuration, chat input bar configuration, this is clearly meant for you to manipulate the way that the chat feature works, right? Like you can change the font, you could change the way the bubble works. And imagine if none of this was here, right? Imagine if, you know, you were just kind of, oh, you can't even disable it. But again, just hypothetically, imagine if this wasn't here, and imagine if you just had to add these by yourself. Like, yeah, you know, you can watch a tutorial and be like, oh, okay, I get what this thing does now. But it's better to already have it here and to let the player, you know, play around with it, you know, have some fun, see what it does. And again, you know, saves the scripter's time. So again, already with the way that this menu functions, right? Like, I think it's a lot better. Like, I'll be honest, I'd much rather start off my game in a project file that looks like this, because it feels like it kind of already has everything. Like, I don't really know about you. I don't know if this is just a feeling that I have, but I really like it when things are prepared. You know, like I don't like it when you're just left with just a thing just empty of a lot of useful stuff. I like it when all of the useful stuff is right here. So I really like the fact that, like, you can open this up and you already have a script with a module script. You already have a screen GUI. You already have, you know, the necessary scripts over here. You already have, you know, the lighting and all of the parts and the camera over here. In a weird way, I feel like this gives us more freedom, because now it's like, okay, Roblox is actually giving you these important tools and it's telling you, hey, listen, go make games with them. And I think this works infinitely better than just not having these over here, right? Like, I understand some people might say that, oh, but you know, not everyone uses a remote event, but like, let's be real. Practically everybody does. Everybody uses this. Everybody uses script. Everybody uses local script. And I keep repeating this, but this would just make the experience better for literally every single person, for both the beginner developer and the experienced developer. Practically every single person would benefit from a little change like this one. And the last thing that I have on my mind, I'm sure there's a lot more that you can think of, so you could, you know, go comment those down right now. But the last thing that I can think of is letting the players know about a starter character. So in case you don't know, if you take a character, so a character is just a thing that has a humanoid, has all of the, you know, necessary parts. And if you take it, if you rename it to starter character, exactly like this, and then if you put it inside of the starter player folder, then anytime you play the game, that will now become your character. Right? So instead of me having my default original character, it'll be whatever character I have inside of starter player. And so what I think would be really cool is that, you know, like maybe when you know, open up the template for the very first time, it actually will have this starter character model over here. And I think the way we can do this is just that it can just be fully, completely empty. And this will do nothing when you actually play the game. Like right now it gives a little warning, right? But like, you know, like if I just play the game with this empty starter character thing, it doesn't do anything. But people who, you know, will play the game and will, you know, start to familiarize themselves with different objects will notice that, hey, you know, their model, their character looks like this, right? And so does this thing. So perhaps I could, you know, copy all of these things, and, you know, perhaps I could also put them inside of, you know, the starter character. And so, you know, they can do this thing, they can, you know, play around with, and then from there, you know, they'll be able to figure out, like, maybe they can invite a friend or something, and then that friend will be like, oh, hey, I have the exact same avatar as you, right? And then you're like, okay, now I realize it, like now I understand what this starter character thing does. Or maybe when you add a rig, you can add a block rig. Like, you know, you see that it's the same thing. You see that it has these exact same properties. And so then, you know, you put them inside of here, and then you're like, okay, now I see what this thing does. Or maybe Roblox could even just change the way that the character system works, so that instead of it just being a regular model, it could be an actual, like, item that says character. And then when you hover your mouse over it, it could tell you like, oh, you know, like you could put character items inside of here. And then, if, you know, if you have all of the correct items, then this will become your character model, like something like that. Because I'll be honest, I only really figured out how to do this when I like had to go and like research for it, which again didn't take, you know, too long. But I do think it's kind of stupid how a feature that's actually quite important, I think, is kind of locked behind a tutorial. Like, again, I'm not saying that Roblox must have every single item in existence over here, because yeah, that will complicate things. But I feel like something like a starter character, especially when you already have a starter player folder, I think that this should be an actual default thing in every single template. Like, I'm not too sure why they haven't really added this in yet. And again, the best part about all of this is that when you actually play the game, everything still functions fine, right? I mean, yeah, you get these things printed out, hello world, so you know, that's pretty cool. And actually, yeah, like as a new player, you would see this in the, you know, output, and you'd be like, okay, interesting. So this would already tell you that, okay, things go in the output when you print them, and you could click this and you could check, oh, okay, I see. So this script prints this script prints this, and interesting, server, client, like you get to see everything in action. And again, this is just kind of like a side effect of what I was trying to do. Like, this wasn't really intended. But again, this doesn't change anything besides just give the player more information as to how things work, and also give experienced developers just an easier time. Like, now you no longer have to waste a second adding a remote event. It's already here. You don't have to waste time adding a script and a module script. It's already here, right? Same thing with, you know, the GUI, same thing with starter player. Like, you could see how these are tiny changes that are so easy to add. I can literally just do them within literal seconds. Like, I know I talked a lot, so this video probably is a lot longer than a few seconds, but like, if any Roblox developers watching this, they could very easily just do this in a couple seconds and then just ship that as a new update. Like, hey guys, you know, the new developer update, we watched this amazing guy and his amazing video, and now Studio is infinitely better. And then everyone is like, wow, amazing. We're saving seconds of our time every single time we make a new project. And honestly, with the amount of projects that some people have, I genuinely think that a lot of people would benefit from a change like this. And again, it would also just bring in a lot more beginner developers. I keep saying beginner developers, like, it genuinely would help Roblox Studio become less complex. It's not even complex right now when you compare it to like Unity or Unreal Engine, but those have their own issues, right? I think Roblox right now is really good at being simple, but I think adding these little extra features would just help that so much more, and this is very easy to do, so I really do hope that this one day happens. All right, so I kept talking about beginner developers, and you know, if whenever I said that, you were like, yay, that's me, like you jumped out of your chair, you started like spinning and levitating in the air. And if you're also someone who enjoys the way I explain things and thinks that I'm the best scripter known to man, which I obviously am, I do have a course. You know, I know everyone has a course these days. I know earlier I mentioned the dropshipping guy who will send you his free dropshipping template or whatever, but basically, like, it's just a course about Roblox Studio in practically its entirety, right? There's like very advanced concepts which I don't talk about because the whole point is to get you from a beginner level to a level where you actually understand Roblox Studio and you don't overcomplicate things, like I said before. So this is a really big thing, right? People overcomplicate things too much. They think that, again, adding a piece of text is way harder than it actually is, and that's kind of the mindset that I instill in you within the course, that no, it's not. Here's how everything actually works. Here's how this system works, so that you don't actually leave with a sense of like feeling weird about something. And ever since like last week, it's actually 50% off, basically for forever now. So I cut the price to half because a lot of people have been telling me that it's way too expensive, and it kind of is. I agree. But people still bought it. You know, the reviews are all amazing. I have one like 2-star review, but it's in Spanish, so I don't read Spanish, so in my eyes, no bad reviews, only 5-star reviews. So, you know, I have the course linked in the pinned comment and the description, so you can go check that out. I got my Instagram as well, if you want to see my pet pigeons. I have like pigeon pets, they're pretty cool. So you can go like the photos and follow my account. Like I said earlier as well, do comments as to, you know, maybe something you disagree with, or maybe something that you would add yourself to the list. Like, maybe you think that it would be better for scripts to actually come with like something. Like, maybe you think it'd be cool for scripts like within templates to come with something like, this is a while loop, and then it has like a while true loop or something like that. I mean, this would literally break the game if a player doesn't remove this line, which would be kind of funny. But, you know, just like something like this, like just something that you think I missed, something that you think I maybe didn't talk about, something that you think would actually make Studio a lot better for, again, both experienced players and beginner players, right? Like, we don't want to leave anyone out. And yeah, you know, I do hope this video makes some people think and consider the possibility that I, you know, lay out on this video, because again, I see a lot of potential in Studio, and when I say potential, I think it's already really good. There's even more things that it can excel at, right? And this is just a very easy start that, again, I didn't think too much about, but I think this would make a really big impact. So once again, you know, let me know what you think. And I always end my videos with saying back to basics, and I like delete everything. So, you know, I delete everything that I added, and then they say we're back to basics. And, you know, it's kind of cool because it's like, oh yeah, we did so much cool stuff, but at the end of the day, we were always in like a basic little base plate. At least like that's how I see it. I don't know if anyone else sees it like that. But just for this video, you know, to celebrate this potentially being an actual default base plate, I'll just pretend this is a default. I'm not going to delete everything. So as always, we are back to basics. Thank you for watching.